distinction, however, between women's leadership and feminist leadership. Do you want to share with us what those differences are? And if there are such differences, why does it matter that the leader is not only a woman, but also a woman that understands feminism, that understands the role and influence of feminism in leadership?
For me, it's very important to understand that I think Vivian touched it a little bit on the fact that the struggle is not just to have women in power or in representation positions, but to actually understand that women are not homogeneous. So women come from different backgrounds and they carry different experiences, and these experiences can shape the way they shape policy. And that's why we have to work as much as possible to expose women in leadership, young women in leadership, to as many experiences of our people as possible, so that when the representation is there, even that we are encompassing very many different lived experiences of women on the continent. For me, it's in Uganda, we just come from a very violent election, you know. I'm sure many countries can relate to that. And understanding that the current political establishments we have across the continent are elitist, you know. Class is a very important thing. It's elitist. So we are operating in a it's not post-colonial, inherited political colonial systems that we have not done much to shift in terms of, even after 50-something years of independence, that we have not done a lot to shift the very, very foundations of these political systems. So for me, it's important to understand that the system itself, the way it's set up, the way its roots in colonial setup of a nation state that we are operating in is elitist, is classist, and it's not meant to actually accommodate many people, including women. So when we talk about feminist leadership, then we have to continue to lend our voice into the understanding of how do we operate within a post-colonial state, and be aware that this colonial state is not going to, it's not set up to represent everyone. And what do we do with that, right? So for me as a Pan-Africanist, I'm very, very interested in working beyond the colonial borders that we inherited and we continue to latch on often. So as much as I'm from Uganda, I work a lot with people from different countries and trying to understand our shared inherited, complicated legacies, and as well as find those opportunities where we can expand our rights and our governance issues. So having a feminist leader, for me, it's not leadership. It's not about only having women in power. It's important to have women in power, but what do these women find? You know, we have many parliaments where women are every day sexually harassed. You know, they cannot speak, they are blackmailed. You know, and this is from experience in Uganda and other parliaments. Parliaments are some of the most violent places for women. So how are women going to lead if they're operating within violent systems, when the systems are very violent to them? So that's why we have to be very, very determined to dismantle the settings within where women are going. It's not enough to send a woman in parliament. It's not enough to send them into the judiciary. How are we working every day to make sure that the system is dismantled, that we breed new norms for our governance, so that when women come in these spaces, that they can actually ably, explore their potential in their leadership skills. Because a lot of times women spend time, you know, in these places, but they're distracted. They are distracted by, you know, everyday things that take away from you as a woman, not recognizing your leadership, not recognizing your power. These are the things that must be interesting for us. So for me, feminist leadership is deconstructing what the place where leadership is taking place, but also understanding if a majority of our countries go through governance that is governance of the majority. What does that mean? What does feminist leadership look like for ethnically marginalized? We already talked about it's a colonial state. It means that if we adopted then later neoliberalism, where it says it is a rule of the majority, that's what democracy is, what happened to indigenous communities where we exist in, who are never going to have a parliamentarian, and whose experiences we don't know anything about? So for me, it's very important to know that that pushing only women in power, saying we have more women in power, is not enough. But also we have to be very cognizant of the fact that patriarchy does not die because women have gone into a place, because patriarchy is espoused by all of us. It's a system that we are socialized in to uphold male authority, that often, even when women are in power, they're waiting for a man to tell them what to do, because it's socialization, or they have to check, they have this lack of this doubt, constant doubt, that is both internalized but also from the outside constantly. So for me, it's very important to understand that even when you have majority of your parliament women, that the society is still patriarchal, that often, even if you have a majority of parliamentarians women, when we live in a dictatorships where a person, one man, holds all the power, it does not translate to women. So we have to understand, we have to look at how does this translate to women in all their diversity, right? And constantly understand that we're at a very big cusp, in Africa, in terms of as a society, that we have a majority. I come from Uganda. I think it's the third youngest country in the world, right? Where an average age of a person in Uganda is 19 years. So what are we going to do when we are not engaging 19-year-olds, when we have kind of formulated this kind of leadership where you have old men at the top, some women there, like 12% of the country is the one ruling, managing our resources. So we see voices of young teenagers, adolescent girls, not mattering in our current setup. How do we burst out of these boxes? Every meeting has like a young women's corner, a youth panel. It's very, very important that we burst out of these constrained boxes that young people have been put in our society, to say, you can be on the main panel, you should be on the main panel, you should be a part of main everything, even when there are certain particular concerns that you might want to discuss in a very specialized panel. We must fight that this is mainstream, that we don't say, okay, the young women's corner, the young people's corner. It's very important that the young people, that the majority of this continent, they have to be at the table, because we cannot continue to formulate policies that do not encompass or do not look done by people who don't look like the society. So the society has to be represented. So it's the same with women and young women. And for young women, they face very many challenges, oppressive challenges, because we also live in a very ageist, hierarchical society, where the younger you are, the less likely you're going to listen to. So imagine when you're young and woman, or you're young and queer woman on this continent, who is going to listen to you? So we have to be very privy of these of these structures that we have to really dismantle and bring everybody on board, and respect everybody's opinion and their lived experiences as valid on that table. So as long as we continue to fill our parliament with men over 50, we are not going to shift much. I don't care if you bring in 30% women. But when the majority of people making your policies are 50 something plus, women and men, it's not reflective of that the challenges on the ground are. So I really think that young women's organizing has been the pillar that has moved societies always. And young women on the continent, often we think that they are not engaged, but actually you'll be surprised, there's very many parallel organizing of young women successfully organizing and tackling every day, having each other's back, having collectives. How do we get these collectives and organizing that is going outside the mainstream? How do we bring them and create the environment, not just inclusion, but bring them with the ideas and be open for these ideas to change what we are putting as the mainstream society? So for me, it's very important, from the very systems of political governance to current movements on the continent. You know, we have movements in Uganda and DRC like Lucha, how young people's movements, you know, trying to ensure good governance, peaceful transfer of power, all this distribution of resources, but they are still very patriarchal, very male-centered, centered on a one man who is arrested and we are all going into a fit. How do we actually make a very inclusive system? So for me, movements on the continent. So young women are already doing it. I think it's very important that we see this out of the margins to the mainstream. Thank you so much.